Recording now. That is weird. Cool. So I wanted to briefly go over the agenda for the Career in Freshwater panel, just so we're all aware of what's going on. So the structure of this panel is somewhat flexible, but I do want to make sure that we do proper introductions of all of our panelists. We have a few prepared questions that were both given by students previously. And then after the prepared questions, we'll open it up for Q&A for all the students. And then it should work that we will have breakout groups by each panelist. I can basically set up the breakout groups, and then you can actually assign yourself to a breakout group. And I believe you can move in between them. Zoom is updated to that, so that makes life easy. But before we introduce our lovely panelists, I want to give a special shout out to one student. I would like to congratulate Oregon Lakes Association Scholarship recipient of 2021, Jamila Bai, who I believe is in this audience. She's a University of Oregon PhD candidate, and she's doing some really interesting work actually on a lake in the Oregon Cascades, doing, I believe, paleolimnology. So Jamila, if you're here, feel free to say hi. And I'll give her a big congratulations, yes.
Thank you very much.
So excited to have you here and excited to hear about your work in the future.
Thank you.
Awesome. So with that, I would like to introduce each of our panelists. We do have 6 panelists. I believe we're waiting on Jennifer. She should hopefully be on her way. But I'll go ahead and get started. First, we have Wafa Tafesh. She's a water quality planner at the King County Water and Land Resources Division. To give you a bit more background on her, I should stop sharing my screen, sorry y'all. This is the limitations of one with a laptop. So Wafa is a University of Washington graduate. She has a career focused in environmental public health, experience in nonprofit work, private and government sector work. The various projects that she's worked on included green stormwater infrastructure, disinfection, and chloroform compliance of public drinking water systems, and stormwater and hazardous waste management compliance. She's currently with the Science and Technical Support Section within the King County's Water and Land Resources Division. Her work includes water quality sampling, managing water quality data systems, and assisting with report writing. So if you wanna share, yeah, awesome. And next up, we've got Toni Pennington. She's an aquatic biologist. She has over 20 years of experience, that's a long time, of work focused on the management and research of aquatic plants, preparing and implementing sampling and analysis plans for freshwater systems, and developing aquatic invasive species prevention and management programs. After completing her PhD at in environmental science and management, Toni began working in the field of environmental consulting and currently is a senior biologist and project manager for the Environmental Science Associates in Bend, Oregon. In addition, she has several memberships with professional organizations, including the Oregon Lakes Association, and is the treasurer for the Western Aquatic Plant Management Society. Toni, if you want to wave. Hey, awesome. And I've got Dr. Angela Strecker, who is actually my advisor. She's the associate professor at Western Washington University and is also the director of the Institute for Watershed Studies. Her research interests include anthropogenic stressors in freshwater ecosystems, such as invasive species, climate change, habitat connectivity, contaminants, as well as continental scale patterns in aquatic biodiversity. Her lab works on a variety of study units, from genes to populations to communities to entire food webs. And ultimately, this work leads to the question of how ecosystem functions and services may be affected by human activities. Hi, Angela. And next up, we have Zach Kinney, Dr. Zach Kinney, I should say, who is the Fisheries Science Department Manager for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, or as I know it's called CRICFIC, and is a member of the Nez Perce tribe. Zach received a BS in Aquatic Resources from the Sheldon Jackson College in Sitka, Alaska, and Master's in Earth and Ocean Science from the University of Victoria, BC, and a PhD in Natural Resources with a fisheries focus from the University of Idaho. At CRICFIC, Zach manages a diverse team of tribal and non-tribal professionals that provide technical and scientific support to the 4 Columbia River Treaty Tribes of CRICFIC. Hi, Zach. Awesome. And we have also with us Lisa Brown, who is a staff attorney at Water Watch of Oregon since 2004. She works in the administrative and judicial proceedings before the Oregon legislature and collaborative processes to protect and restore stream flow in rivers, lakes, and groundwater dependent ecosystems across Oregon. Lisa holds a bachelor's in environmental science from Oregon State University and a JD with a natural resources certificate from Lewis and Clark Law School. She is a member of the Oregon Bar. Hi, Lisa. Awesome. And panelist that we're missing is Jennifer. She said she was coming, so I'm assuming something's just come up. I haven't heard anything from her, but I will introduce her just in case she pops in a little late. Jennifer O'Reilly is our fish and wildlife biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Central Oregon since 2001. She has a master's in environmental and forest biology and a BS in water resources from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse, New York, with both degrees rooted in wetlands ecology. Currently, she is a service species lead for Oregon spotted frog and the recovery lead for bull trout at Odell Lake. She says she's on her way. Awesome. Thanks, Tony. Cool. So with that, I would like to kind of start this off with some prepared questions that will hopefully, there's Jennifer, so that will allow this panelist to basically get to introduce themselves more. And these questions were kind of actually developed by me and other students who emailed me in advance. So we'll start with that. And to the panelists, feel free to turn off your mic when you're ready to respond. And you don't have to answer every question, but I'm hoping we'll get at least a few answers on each question. And then I will make sure that we move on by like 3:30, 3:40 or so to the open Q&A so all the students can actually hear out. Hi, Jennifer. Glad you could make it. Okay, so my first question for the panelists are, what were some early roles that served you well in furthering skills, networking, or career direction, i.e. finding clarity on your career path? Anybody like to go first?
I'm not shy. This is Tony. I really liked this question because it's one I wish that my younger self knew when I was starting my career. I think I can actually have a pretty short answer, and that's to volunteer. Not just with professional societies like you know Laura's doing right now with Oregon Lakes Association, but you know, volunteering in your community. I know for me, when I review a resume right now, there's always a lot of focus on the classes and the projects, but oftentimes it's the bit at the end where someone says that they volunteered at their, I don't know, as a big brother, big sister even. Like I notice that kind of stuff because it kind of tells me a little bit more about the person. And it's a way to engage in the community that you're going to be serving in your profession. So that one to me is, that one was very easy, and I wish someone had told my younger self that.
Yeah, I would add on to that, this is Angela, that, you know, volunteering is also, if it's available to you, recognizing that it's not necessarily available to everyone, but if it is, can give you a chance to try on different hats and try different, potential career options and things that you might be interested in that you've just never had an opportunity to. And so it can be a way to kind of get a glimpse into different worlds. And I also, like Tony, wish I would have, done that a little bit more and tried some different things as a result of that.
So hey everybody, so again, this is Zach, and I'm happy to be here today. And before I say anything, since we're being recorded, I do want to make sure that any of the things I say today and the opinions I express don't necessarily represent CritFic or any of the member tribes. So I wanted to make sure that that was known. But with respect to the question, I kind of wanted to answer all of these with sort of a lot of the same elements, but I think that for any role, like volunteering be a good example, that things that you can do as a student that sort of, for lack of a better words, help you sort of walk and chew gum at the same time is really important for kind of where you go in your professional career. I guess my own opinion, I've always been somewhat of a reluctant leader. I've never necessarily wanted to be the one that just inserts themselves in front and says, I'm in charge. I've often found myself in roles where it just happened. And sometimes, it puts you in those situations where you really got to start thinking on your feet a bit more. I mean, when you're a student, and when I was a student, I can remember preparing for professional presentations, for weeks, getting the PowerPoint ready, rehearsing every little word that I say. But, as I moved away from academia and, get into, whether it's sitting at the proverbial table with folks, you never know what's going to come at you. And getting comfortable with your own voice and sort of developing confidence and doing the things that help you sort of develop, doing things that help you get comfortable with your voice and sort of develop that confidence. It always seems to operate on a spectrum where, I've always been worried when somebody's overconfident, but I've also seen people who are completely underconfident of what they could actually do. And so trying to hold that balance is really important. So getting comfortable with your own voice. But when you get comfortable with your own voice, you also got to hold that professional and human line. So, or I guess human being line in terms of what you say. So you always be careful, think before, stuff that comes out of your mouth. And then just on the practical and I'd say intellectual side of things, academia, there's so much you can learn through, your coursework and things like that. But doing things that give you sort of those, I guess, practical lessons, some of those hard knock lessons. I mean, something as simple as learning to drive a standard vehicle and back a trailer up to do, fishery stuff. Like there's things like that kind of I just think really important to sort of making yourself well-rounded as a professional. So instead of rambling, I'll stop there and let somebody else talk.
I could jump in and give a little different perspective. The way I answer this question and the early role that served me really well within my career was I started working right out of university at the Department of Health. And it was really important for me and my skill set to have that early interactions with a government agency and getting to know who essentially are the regulators within the state. After I was at the state, I ended up working for a private company who was sort of fearful of all the regulators and their inspectors that came on site. And having that background with the state and just, having those relationships with them, I was able to bring that to the private company that I worked with and had that, just open relationship with our inspectors that came on site. So that really served me well within my career.
Yeah, this is Lisa. I guess I would echo what others are saying about, it's a good time when you're in school to maybe try out different things, volunteer if you can, or get a part-time job. When I was in college, I got trained as a volunteer to actually file like administrative protests of old growth timber sales. And then when I finished college, I got a stream surveying job with the Forest Service Research Branch. And both of those really helped shape kind of my view of sort of how science fits into policy and law and kind of the different moving pieces of that. And both of which were really helpful. So I think just, yeah, trying out different things and yeah, getting, as Zach was saying, just kind of really getting some real world experience, testing out what you like and don't like, I guess.
So this is Jen. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, so I'm pretty heavy on the bio side of things, and water. Water is very, very important in the work that I do. And I think that in the early part of my career, I went to a forestry college, and we did like immersion work. Like a lot of the courses and the coursework required you to be like at a field station for a given period of time, where really you lived and breathed that. You got to know your people and the environment around you, you were immersed in. And I feel like, depending on which aspect of the sciences you're going into, I think having a very deep connection to whatever it is that you're doing, if you're doing the science side of thing, working with other scientists in that kind of immersive environment can be really, really great. And then I'll second everything else everyone has said as far as like get as much experience as you can, all the volunteer work, bringing different organizations together and learning how to like understand one another. That's like a big, big part of it. So, I always say diversity is the answer to everything, and getting your diverse level of experiences with people, your environment, different aspects of the sciences is, you can't go wrong. You go on that path.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Another question that this is kind of two questions, and you can answer one or the other, or both if you're feeling it, is what advice would you give your younger self at the start of your career, or what advice would your future self give to you now? So feel free to choose one or the other. I thought they were interesting choices.
I'll jump first at this one. Honestly, it depends at sort of what point in my life you're talking about. I definitely would have different guidance for myself as a student versus guidance as a professional. But I wrote some stuff down, so bear with me. I mean, the biggest thing I wrote down was some balance and perspective. And I heard this saying one time, and it's always stuck with me, is that if, thinking back to my time as an undergraduate student, my time as a master's student, my time as a PhD student, those were all very different experiences. And I was a very different person a very different person at the time of those experiences. But the saying was, if you threw your problems in a pile with everybody else's, you probably want your problems back. And looking back at the things that really stressed me out as a student versus the things that stress me out now, I definitely, there's a lot of things that ring true with that. So one of the things for students, I would say, especially for those of you that are already in graduate programs or going to move on to graduate programs or JDs, is you'll often find yourself comparing yourself to the next person, especially as a student. And this can just do all sorts of crazy stuff to you. I mean, how come I haven't done my analysis yet? How come they finished in 2 years versus there's a lot of things that we often do to ourselves in terms of how we compare ourselves to others. And I want to just sort of warn against that everybody's experience is going to be different, and don't always compare yourself to what other graduate students are doing. I mean, if you see somebody's writing, like, man, that writing looks, how did they write the thesis that well? I guarantee you that is after many different iterations of writing with people tearing it apart. So be careful with that. I'd also say, in terms of keep a pace to avoid burnout. Again, this is something that sometimes I think we get stuck with as students, is that, if you have multiple courses and everything's sort of do. We all get into, I still get stressed out around final season. I haven't been a student for more than, several years now, but, there's this balance I think we need to, that folks need to keep. There's a certain amount of minutia that comes with everything, and you should spend the appropriate time on minutia. They always say, don't sweat the small stuff, the devil's in the details and things like that. But I guarantee you my current job, I could fill 120% of my day with minutia and lose sight of the bigger picture. So I think that's a balance and perspective that you always need to think about. And then not to take up too much more time and give the other panelists, enough time to speak is, I wrote this thing, don't take yourself so seriously. And again, like this kind of, we're all at different places at different stages, but I wrote down, forgiveness for not knowing what to do. You're going to run into things that, outside of the coursework that you're not going to know exactly sort of how to react to it. Being a tribal scientist, I've experienced all sorts of things that were, things in both the classroom and professional societies that have been really, really uncomfortable. And I used to get mad at myself, like, how come I didn't answer this way? Or how come I didn't behave this way? What would have been the correct thing? That as you move on to your professional career and student, you're going to get those experiences. And that's where that experience comes from. So if you ever find yourself in that position, don't beat yourself up over it. I mean, take from that experience and apply it later. I'll stop there.
That was great. And I agree with all of that. The other thing I would say that to be, and I think just kind of tagging on, but to be, patient and kind with yourself, because you are going to fail and failure is normal and everybody fails and people just talk about it to a different extent. And I think it's okay. But the other thing is being patient. When I first started doing research as an undergrad, I thought it was going to move so fast. I was just like, I'm going to have results. I'm going to get it out there. And I was just, and then I was so frustrated by how slow science moves, and it does. And, you're not going to accomplish like, an entire master's project in like 6 months, right? Like science and good science takes time. So you have to give yourself the bandwidth and the patience. And some of the best advice that I ever got was that, science is really baby steps. Like you make incremental steps forward. And then at the end of it, it looks like you've done this great big thing, and you have, but you didn't get there in one giant step. You got there in thousands of baby steps.
Angela, you just reminded me of something that along those same lines, in that I had a hard time always remembering that working on my master's, especially, I learned it the first, I was told it the first time with my master's. I actually learned this in my PhD. And that was with my master's, my advisor kept asking me, what is your question? And I would come back, I found this great paper. This is so interesting. Guess what they found? Look what they did. That's great, Tony. What's your question? And I'd come back, I kept doing this over and over again. And it sort of clicked with my master's, but not in the same level as my PhD. And the problem I had with both of those, I think, that took me a while to see is it was about the question. It was about the process. So I got lucky. I did get to publish a couple of chapters from my PhD, but it was really about the process of the science. And like you say, it can be slow. And that's that. I go back to that all the time now. And as a consultant, I find that a little bit challenging sometimes because it's rarely my question that I'm addressing. And so now something that took me so long to finally wrap my arms around, I have to sort of push it away sometimes in my current role. But I'm really glad you brought that up about being patient, because I struggled with that. And then in retrospect, seeing again that process was really what I was in school to learn about and embrace. But I was kind of resistant, and I wish I hadn't been.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just chime in on that one too, with being patient, beyond just the work of doing science or the work of doing a master's or PhD. Once you're into natural resource management, or if you're whatever field you end up in, we call these like a lot of times if we're working on something, we call it it's a long play. It's not something that is other than, if you're doing restoration work, or that might be very tangible more quickly, but even some of those, especially if they're a large scale project, take a really long time. And so there is a level of patience and sort of hit the pause if you're feeling burned out, so you can reinvigorate yourself or find other things that that give you joy and give you a break. Always take a mental break. One of the things that I used to go through sometimes in grad school when I was trying to hammer out, some work is just have to take a break, go fishing or go somewhere for the day, go for a long hike and then come back. And man, those thoughts you can really gel after you go and do and take a break. And so I give that advice to my young self. I give that advice to myself now, because sometimes, I put my head down and before I know it, the day's over and oh my goodness, I'm lucky if I even, took a really deep breath. So yeah, pace yourself. These are long plays. Life should be enjoyable and your work should be enjoyable. Not all the time. Sometimes you got to push hard, but it pays to pace yourself. So.
Yeah, I think everything that was just said is great. I think my advice to my younger self, at whatever point you think your career started, which could be undergrad or even high school, who knows? But it's just really that it will all work out. So to just sort of keep focused on doing the things that are interesting to you, that kind of keep you going and recharge you, and that it will all work out. I remember somebody telling me that when I was fresh out of law school and there were not very many jobs available. And somebody said, you know what, it all works out. Everybody will end up, you're going to end up where you need to end up. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's easy for you to say, because it is really hard to do in the moment. When you're under a lot of pressure at school. I mean, grad school, undergrad, it's all stressful. But really to just, enjoy it as much as you can, and know that it will really work out for you. And as far as advice that I would give to myself now, that I think is similar to what Jennifer, is that your name? Yeah, was just saying is, I try and just carve out time to work on the projects that really recharge me, because you're always going to have time sensitive things flying at you. You have to deal with. But there are probably some bigger projects that get back burner just because of that. But kind of know what those are and know which ones you really, want to carve out some time to commit to, that really kind of keep you going through it. And that's something I try and do, along with the hikes. That's important too.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for your responses. I will ask one question before opening up to open Q&A. Is what courses or experiences should students be prioritizing right now? And that can come from your specific field of view or thinking more broadly. So yeah, courses or experiences. I know some of you have touched on it a little bit already, but if you have something to expand on.
I'll jump in. I'm a big advocate of prioritizing, doing things that are interesting to you, that you think are interesting, that you could see yourself doing in the long run. And if you don't know what those are, as we've kind of talked about already, it's often a good chance to take an internship or a part-time job or a volunteer project to figure out what that is. But I think it, you know, the actual substance of a class, you know, this stats program or whatever it is, you're all smart. You can get that later, I think. But just really figuring out what makes you tick. What are you interested in doing, and prioritize doing those things. That's my advice for what it's worth.
I will also add on to that is not only doing what interests you within the field, but also one thing I wrote down was seeing the full circle of the work or the job. When I was first starting out in my career, I had internships where I was told, like, this is what you're going to be doing, and you're going to be doing it every day, you know, until the end of the summer. The job I had was with the Office of Shellfish and Water Protection, and my job was just to collect oysters from a harvesting site and take them to the lab so they could be analyzed. But I was really adamant with my supervisor that I wanted to see what happened once the oysters got to the lab, and then go back to the lab the next day to see, you know, the results of what we were doing, and then going back to the office and seeing the outcome of, you know, the samples that I was collecting from the harvest sites. And that really changed the way I was going to be doing my job for the rest of the summer, because I knew that if I came in with a big batch of oysters that needed to be analyzed before a certain time, I knew I had that relationship with the lab that I could just then go in and help them, you know, process those samples. So it really was really important for me to see just everything, that the full circle of that job. And it was something I took with me for each position that I went into in my career. When I was with the Office of Drinking Water, even though I was, you know, I had a desk job, I made sure that I went out there to see drinking water systems and see every part of that treatment system. So that would be one thing I would say.
I really like that. I feel like a lot of times when companies or private sector, public or private, bring in an intern, we all like the idea of it, but we're all so buried in our work, which is why we brought in an intern. But it makes it difficult for us to carve out the bandwidth to keep that person engaged. And I think you did the right thing as an intern to keep pushing and let those supervisors know that you want to do more, that you're not there to just do this one thing and take things over to the lab. I did something similar. I counted crab trap permits for Texas Parks and Wildlife when I was an intern, and that's all they expected me to do. It's like I was done in like 2 weeks what they thought was going to take, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks, because, you know, it's like, well, we can all do more. So I think pushing those supervisors to make it clear that you're interested in other things is something that you're going to have to do the rest of your career. So you may as well start now, like letting your supervisors know that you want to take on more. That's on you. If it's great if you've got a supervisor that recognizes your skills. I think I'm lucky that I have one like that. I know Jennifer is, but not everyone has that. A lot of times you have to constantly remind them that, yes, I know statistics. I don't just, you know, have this one title. You know, you have to self-advocate, I guess is what I'm getting at.
When I was thinking about this question, I was mostly thinking about it from what I wish I personally was better at and didn't have to like try to figure out on my own. And so those are some like hard skills, like, you know, computer programming and statistics that are, you know, they're not classes that people most naturally gravitate towards, but they are really, really fundamental in, you know, in grad school and even now in undergrad. So we're teaching students programming in, you know, like third year. So it's, I think it's pretty valuable, but also I think more soft skills like collaboration and teamwork, and also as well as interfacing with, you know, policy and management folks that, you know, I'm kind of doing the most public facing science that I've ever done. And I feel totally like a fish out of water because I've, you know, most of the science I've done before just hasn't been in this directly impactful. And so it's, yeah, I wish I, you know, I don't know, you know, if there are courses on that, but I think it's more of an experience thing of trying to, you know, get that experience more rather than kind of figure it out as we go along.
I'll give a fisheries perspective on it. I'm glad you brought up the sort of the statistics part of it. just with respect to coursework, I mean, all of this kind of really depends on what your ultimate goal is and sort of where you want to end up. But, you know, in fisheries, definitely having quantitative skills that can actually be complemented by strong writing skills is something that I'm constantly looking for. I know some brilliant mathematicians that can barely put together an email, and you know that has a major impact on sort of how they get their stuff communicated. But a mistake I made during my undergrad is I took as few stats courses as I could because stats are hard. Who likes to do statistics? And it wasn't until I got to my master's that I actually needed multivariate analysis under my belt. And just the sound of multivariate analysis, you know, scared the crap out of me. But until you actually need it and need to find ways to apply it, was I actually just really, you know, striving to figure out how to do it. And when I did my PhD, for every class that I took that was sort of biology related, I complemented it with a stats course. And one of the sayings I heard during my PhD was, generally, the more math you take, the more money you make. I don't know if that's actually true, but in terms, it's not so much getting those statistics and mathematical skills to develop brand new analyses. I mean, some of it's just to understand what other people have done. I mean, reading stats to a degree is like a different language. And if you ever have to go through a peer-reviewed article and you have to struggle through the method section, just having an understanding of some of those basic stats principles really helps you interpret that language a lot easier. And just another quick example is something I recently participated in and finished with is the Columbia Basin Partnership Task Force, which is now becoming the Columbia Basin Collaborative, which involves all the states that are within the Columbia Basin. A lot of people lawyered up for that. And this is a diverse group of stakeholders and sovereigns. So sovereigns being states and tribes and stakeholders from multiple NGOs, interest groups, and things like that. And people lawyered up to sort of protect their interests, but I actually brought our biometrician with me because a lot of what we're talking about was quantitative goals. And there's definitely legal frameworks that people were relying on, but they really didn't have the capacity to kind of dive into the data and make some of those more technical calls. So that's a perspective I have just from, I guess, on the quantitative side of things. But on experience side, I'd also say that there's so much stuff that you're not going to get from a book or from a course or doing a group project that ends with a presentation at the end of the semester that, whether it's fish, whether it's wildlife, whether it's something related to botany, fish are actually pretty easy subjects to deal with. It's actually people that are really hard to deal with. And a lot of the stuff that I do in fisheries isn't so much something the fish did. It's actually sort of managing things that people have done to the landscape and how people use different resources. That's the real tough part. And some of that stuff you're only going to get from, getting that experience and working with public, other sovereigns, other co-managers, and things like that. So in any way that you can do that, that's something that those experiences are things that you should prioritize.
I'm gonna mirror Zach here a little bit. So, I work as a fish and wildlife biologist. I'm a federal biologist. I in the coursework, it was a lot of water science and ecosystem function, even like global function of the planet. Like, how does the planet function? What is the Coriolis forest? What are all these like winds and patterns? And then I deal a lot of times with issues of scale. So landscape scale, things are done and analyzed in all kinds of various scales. So getting, geographic information systems, like getting some of that stuff under your belt can really help you with analysis going forward, just like statistics, same sort of tool in your tool belt for doing analytical work and biological work. But yes, the people aspect, the collaborative work that you need to do, working with NGOs and feds and state and private landowners and tribes. There's a lot of work that goes on there. So whoever you can get experience, you'll learn a lot of skills by just getting lots of different experiences with different entities and organizations. I worked everywhere from, I have not been in the federal system. Actually, I have now for 20 years, but I avoided it for a long time, working for the universities and NGOs and Nez Perce Tribe. And the universities, and just spent a lot of time getting to know a lot of different people and organizations. And interestingly enough, as the years have gone on, those connections and network of connections have grown tremendously. And it makes me much more effective in the work that I do. So, you know, broaden your networks and diversify your background. And then just keep going after the experiences and do what your heart is telling you to do. That is the key right there. Don't just get in a job and, you know, count crabs or whatever you're doing. Like, if your heart's saying, hey, I can offer a lot more than this, then do it, and then, you know, move on. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We do already have a few questions from students, so this is opening it up to everybody. So I will start with the questions in the chat. If you do want to ask your question directly, you can just unmute yourself and say something, but I'll start with this question first because it's kind of building off of that. I see you, Jamila. You'll go next then. So in your experience, this is coming from Katie Sweeney, is it okay to not be good at something? And what are your recommendations related to not having that particular skill? i.e., when you've worked so hard to improve, is it okay to accept that you're not good at it and move on to a different field, or just try to find another way to work around it? Just maybe a couple panelists want to try to answer that.
That's a hard one to answer, but I'm going to go with your gut and go with your heart. What is it telling you? Because that is the answer. Don't try to force something that doesn't feel right. Just do what your heart is telling you to do, and you will go in the right direction.
That is a kind of a tough one to answer because, you know, sometimes it's not necessarily you personally, but the way you're being exposed to the knowledge, or potentially the, you know, maybe there's just a different approach that would work better. And so I hesitate to ever tell people to kind of give up on things, especially if it's something you're really passionate about. And so it could just be that and this sounds really vague, but just the approach is wrong, right? And that there could be a different way. And keeping in mind, like, nobody's good at everything. Like, there's lots of things that I just know I'm not that great at. And I try to get better, but there's, you know, I instead kind of pivot to my strengths. I pivot to the things that I know that I am pretty good at and focus on those to, you know, do the things that I need to do.
So I guess I want to jump in a little bit because it reminds me of something I guess I've always dealt with. I really want to know more context for why you're asking the question, but I got all these sayings so when I was a terrible high school student. I mean, I flunked courses. I thought it was going to be a major struggle to even achieve a bachelor's degree, and I figured that's as far as I'd ever go. And just some dynamics changed when I got into undergrad, and once I was actually able to apply some stuff, sometimes stuff like some of the courses you get in high school are a little abstract. You know, some changes happened, and I sort of found myself way more comfortable in academia. But I've always struggled with math, and I was kind of talking about quantitative skills earlier. So for my PhD program, my GRE scores are abysmal. They still are abysmal by all accounts. If you looked at my GRE scores, I had no business being a graduate student. And my PhD advisor and I talked about that. And, you know, I said, they might not let you in, like they're going to put you on a probation to start. And it definitely kind of takes a huge, you know, your ego takes a huge hit, and you ask yourself if you're actually good enough. But, you know, we're all motivated by different things, and we all do, you know, our processes are different. So one of the sayings that my PhD advisor said is, well, I think you're perspiration over inspiration, meaning, yeah, you're going to have to work really hard at it. You're probably not going to get it the first time, but, you know, I guess I wouldn't necessarily say that, just because you're good at something, you shouldn't do it. I mean, like I said, I think for a lot of things in graduate school, if it's something that you have an interest in, if it's something that recharges you, it's something that you're passionate about, generally that's enough, especially for a master's, to be able to achieve what you need to achieve.
Awesome. Just for the sakeness of time, we'll move on to another question. Jamila, I think you have a question you want to ask.
It's more kind of a comment, and I really want to appreciate how the experience from the different panelists, it really helps you to, to start something. I really wanted to hear most of this because I'm at a like I'm in my 5th year PhD program, and in this time I'm analyzing data, writing dissertation, so much going on. 90% work is done, still 10% left. And I really wanted to hear all this stuff. Thank you very much for organizing like this program. And then it really means a lot when the experienced person shared, like they have been through the same situation, what you are experiencing at your point, and it's not the you, it's like everybody, it's everybody's journey. Thank you very much for sharing all you were experiencing and the suggestions that you can come up with.
Great point, Jamila. Thanks for sharing. I have a question from Rebecca that I think is a good one to ask is, what role did networking relationships play into finding open positions and being hired into jobs you applied for?
I wouldn't mind tackling this one, or starting at least. I have endless gratitude to a number of organizations that I've been a part of, because it's directly led to some of the very best relationships of my life, like working, my clients, my friends, my collaborators. I mean, I've scarcely filled out very many job applications, I think, for that reason, because I think you just know about things that are coming up, and you're in front of the right people, and you know what they're looking for, and you know how to help them accomplish that because you've been there. It's not a complete unknown entity, So when I look at if I look at a job description now, I'm thinking, I think about everything behind that piece of paper more than I think. I don't know. I just see it so much differently, because well, who will I be working with? What kind of projects will I be doing? Like I dive into that side of it because I think I've come into all of my positions from that direction. It's like, oh, I would love to work with so-and-so, and that would be really great. And I want to do everything I can to try and make that happen. As I think all that networking, and it's hard. I think it's one of the hardest things that for most people, to just show up at a meeting when you don't know anybody, or show up on a Zoom call when you don't know half the people, ask a question on a Zoom call when you don't know any of the people. It's really hard for most of us to put ourselves out there, but it has such a rewarding payoff, I think. I really encourage, if anybody has questions about what society or organization might fit you for your specific role in freshwater, I think I'm looking at the panelists, and I think there's if not on the panel on this call, a nice diverse group of people that can point you to the right direction. Whether it's a small group like OLA or a national chapter, like OLA is a national chapter of the North American Lake Management Society. So, there are so many groups out there, and a lot of them, I can tell you, are really itching to get students and young professionals, because they see that the brass are going to be retiring. And I know I'm involved in 3 organizations where getting good scholarship students on board is really important to us, because they'll be taking over our positions. So you're wanted. You just need to figure out who wants you and who you want to be with. So if you don't know, get our email addresses, and maybe one of us can help you out.
I guess to sort of follow up on that, I think mentorship is something that's extremely important, not just as students, but I mean, in the professional realm as well, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a supervisor, whether it's a manager, executive director, what have you. But for myself, I guess, you know, going through academia and stuff, like I feel like I'm a composite. I'm a piece of sort of everybody who I've ever encountered in terms of the stuff that they taught me, whether it was good stuff and in terms of what to do or what not to do. And I've had my PhD advisors like a family member now. And, you know, and some of the experiences that I have, when you get these sort of mentorship relationships, it isn't so much that they're telling you, you do this, do this, do this, and do this. They can help you forge those networks, whether it's, you know, with other agencies or stuff like that. But sometimes they'll also drag you through the door, especially if you don't want to go to stuff that you might that actually does, you know, does well. Like I think scientists often have a tendency to be a little introverted. I mean, I don't want to put that on all of them, but there are a lot that are quite introverted. And yeah, getting to a conference and not knowing anybody and being able to break the ice can be really difficult. But even in jumping into some of these things where you do have to interact, whether it's a professional society or something like that, some of the mentors that I've had have said, all right, you're going to be part of this now. It's like, I don't really want to do that. And then they drag you through the door anyway. And sometimes it turns out to be one of the better things. And that's one of the ways you can actually get to meet more people and just form those connections and network.
When I was starting out early in my career and I was applying for a bunch of jobs at the Department of Health, I know for a fact that the only reason I got my full-time position with the Office of Drinking Water was because I told my supervisor that I had previously interned with that I had applied for that position, and she immediately ran downstairs and told them to give me an interview. And so I'm really curious, thinking back now, if I would have gone through, you know, some of the robots that are behind a lot of these online applications, if my application would have gone through to sit down for an interview with them. But that was the biggest start to my career, was just having that really close relationship with my supervisor, and I still talk to her to this day. But moving forward, and I've had a lot of people reach out to me at King County and, you know, asking for open positions. And, you know, the only thing I could do at this point now is just tell them to apply online and maybe give them a few tips and tricks to, you know, work past some of the computer systems to make sure that, you know, their application is being seen by a human. I really think it's a little more difficult these days when you are applying online, but having those relationships will at least open up more doors and help you see opportunities that are out there that you can apply for.
Yeah, I think networking is extremely important, and I'll just tell you, it worked in my career, but again, back then we were doing paper resumes and fax machines, and it was, it's a little different. But nowadays, working with as a Fed, I know that system is like everyone, you know, hates applying for jobs through that. You never even know if you're going to get a call back. It kind of goes into no man's land. But I've seen it from behind the scenes. And I see the way what's looked at as far as, you know, your resumes, you know, and they definitely, you know, make sure good cover letter, no typos, like try to pay attention to detail on that, because I've seen really good people just kind of get pushed to the side. It's also really, really good if you know where you're trying to get in, to be persistent. Not annoying, but not in an annoying way, but, you know, calling and saying, hey, I'd love to volunteer for you. I'd love to come down and meet you sometime. Would you be willing to answer some questions for me? We are very open to that. Like I often, Zach mentioned mentoring. I do that. Whether we have volunteer, you know, if it's I've had many people volunteer for me, even from out of the country, but also just to kind of come in and chat, you know, and, you know, we're busy, but we will always make time for students and to help mentor. So please feel free to reach out. Don't be afraid. And we can answer questions, emails, and again, this Zoom thing. I tend to work on Microsoft Teams, which is struggle on Zoom a little bit, but you know, we're here and we're available, and this kind of system makes us even more, you know, available. So I encourage people to not be afraid of the system or feeling like, you know, you're just a number, because you really do shine and come through when you're connecting with people, and they do remember you when your resume comes through.
I have two comments. The first of which is, mentorship is just a huge part of my job, and it's one of my favorite parts of my job. And I think students feel guilty when they're, you know, asking me for reference letters and, you know, to be there for them. But that's, you know, like, that's my job, and it's so much better than so many other parts of my job. And so I wish students didn't feel like they're imposing, because, you know, I love it, and I think a lot of my colleagues do too. Second, I'm embarrass Lara slightly. So the reason that she's in my lab is because she introduced herself to me at a conference, or maybe set up a meeting with me at a conference. And we sat down and we talked, and she told me about all these things that she was super passionate about. And it was terrific. And I was like, I just totally want this person to be in my lab. And, you know, it took, I think, a lot of bravery on her part to do that, and to kind of, you know, just reach out cold, you know, totally cold call. And it was awesome. And it was a really good experience. And I think, you know, but yeah, it's hard to initiate that. You know, it feels like a really big step. And some people, you know, not everyone is always going to be receptive to that. So you have to kind of watch out for those folks. But I think for the most part, people are really receptive to that.
Awesome, thanks. I will say I had someone who helped introduce me to Angela, so it helps to always know grad students who might show you up someday when you're looking at grad school, to show you somebody who you might want to work with. Just to give my 2 quick cents. I want to give time for this question that Amalia Handler, who is on the call. I don't know if you want to ask it yourself, Amalia. It's a good question that has been kind of touched upon. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a postdoc with the EPA in Corvallis. I've been there for about 15 months, and this is my first postdoc out of my PhD. And one of the things that I'm recognizing in my work is that I'm really interested in doing more team-based projects. I've done a lot of work solo, very solo, where I am oftentimes the sole leader on sort of pushing projects forward. And that was the case in my PhD, and to less extent, but still a lot of times how my postdoc is structured as well. And I'm interested in trying to figure out a way to sort of plot my skills towards doing more team-based projects. And so I'm curious to hear from the panelists, like, how much team-based work do you experience in your position? And I'm also curious if you have advice about how to seek out those types of opportunities. Thanks.
I'll just speak to it quickly. I love team-based work. That's my favorite thing to do. And I can work solo sometimes, where I'm writing and doing technical analysis, but then that whole coming together piece, and I feel I've brought this up over and over again, we're often on Teams or Zoom now, you know, trying to do work. And that creativity that comes with being in a think tank where you're with people and you're getting together and meeting, and I feel you right now, because right during this pandemic, it's been, that part is very difficult. So I don't know how, I think it depends on where you are in your agency. Some of us are, you know, if you're not doing the real sciencey stuff, maybe you're more in a collaborative, you know, doing natural resource management, where I see a lot of that. It's a lot of team-based work and working with various organizations. I think consulting, you can be into project level stuff. I've worked with several consultants that are in this team kind of setting, at least for a period of time. You know, you get like a contract and you're on it for a year or two, and you know, you're completing something. You know, we just worked on a massive habitat conservation plan for was it 12 years in a team-based setting. And it was very challenging at times, but, you know, also rewarding. So I think you just kind of have to seek it out. I'm appreciative of that part of my work, but there is a solo component where you do have to just work independently as well.
Yeah, Molly, I don't know what your field of study is, but I think I'm the lone consultant on the panel here, if I'm not mistaken. And Jen is right. I mean, I had a couple of projects where I would say I had at least 15 different agency and NGOs on the project. And I loved it because, I mean, how I got there in both instances, it was a very large plan. And the plan itself required all this consensus. And it was about, I don't know, 30% science, which my background was research. So that was a bit of a leap for me to move into this space of the people part that Zach has referenced a couple of times. And I appreciate his perspective and honesty on how that can be so challenging. But it was so interesting looking at the limitations that one group would have versus another and how they would work together and recognizing my role in sort of herding all these cats when I hadn't worked at these organizations before. So I'd have to understand, you know, this NGO works via a board. This federal agency works in a more hierarchical structure, you know, and then there would be the single shingle consultant or something. So, you know, I think, you know, I watch my husband who works for a state agency and he works very collaboratively. I don't think that's necessarily common. So I think, you know, for a state agency staff members, I think it really, in many ways, depends on the path that you take, and you know, where those opportunities could be there. I don't know if there's a simple answer to tell you how anybody gets there, but it is rewarding, as Jen said. It's a little bit of both. You have to hunker down and stare at your spreadsheet for days on end sometimes, and then other times you're having a great fun, like looking at a restoration site with people from all these different groups. And I really kind of like both myself, but I know where you're at right now. It's very isolating, not just with COVID, but just where you are with your work. So I wish you the best in getting there. And as Jen said, I'm happy to, you know, if you want to reach out to me aside, I'm happy to chat about how I got where I did and how consulting is a little bit different than maybe other fields.
This will be quick, but just from the academic perspective, I felt like I really had to seek a lot of that out on my own. And I applied for, you know, early career workshops and things that both expanded my network, but also brought me into teams to work together. And so that, for me, that was amazing. That was what I needed. I needed to have something where everybody was kind of equals, and not, because in a lab, you're kind of like in charge, and I needed something that was a little bit more kind of equal playing field. And so that was helpful. The other, you know, there's some societies like the GLION, the Global Lakes, they have a totally team-based approach to, you know, their group meetings. So, you know, you get to self-select into teams, and everyone has a kind of a voice. And I think that's it's really interesting. I think, you know, potentially a successful approach to getting involved in some team projects.
I'll jump in really fast too, which is I, you know, work for a nonprofit organization, and I think there's different kinds of team experiences, right? There's like working with other NGOs to pass a law at the Oregon legislature, or stop a bad project or something like that. Then there are these full-blown, you know, big collaborative processes that are, I think, have been kind of just described as like really just multi-stakeholder and trying to problem solve different complex water issues. But I mean, I guess I would just encourage you that, you know, there are these processes going on, these collaborative processes and these problem solving processes going on. And a lot of those really could benefit from some science and some agency, you know, expertise and help, I think. So think if there's an issue that you are interested in and that you'd be willing to put some time into, yeah, ask around, and I bet there's somewhere that could really use your help. That's what I would say.
Maybe let me add sort of a really convoluted answer. You know, working for the 4 treaty tribes, you know, one of the places that with co-management in the Columbia River Basin, dealing with the federal hydro system, dealing with threatened endangered species and action agencies is there's places where collaboration is essentially mandated, that as a co-manager, you have to, you work together to work certain things out. One of the positives I'd say, and in my group, like most of the Fisheries Science Department at CritFix is our biggest department, and I have a team of habitat scientists that work in the Upper Grand Ronde Basin, and they work in the I think it's like the Grand Ronde Model Watershed, which is you know, it's both state, NGO, I think some federal agencies are involved in that, and it's a great success story for. It's kind of like putting together a basketball team where you have a very deep bench. You have somebody who's a really, you know, people who can be really good point guards and people who are tall, it can be centers and stuff like that. That's a great place where things like that have worked. But anytime that I think for, you know, tribes and sovereigns to you know, work together with federal agencies, I do think there's always going to be a question about you know, scope creep and then things like that. You know, on a daily basis, you know, we're getting, you know, requests from academic institutions, from consultants and stuff about, hey, you know, have you been looking at this sort of stuff? So sometimes there can actually even be a little bit of a stiff arm, because, you know, sometimes to make certain things work, you know, people do need funding and things like that. So don't be surprised that as you maybe seek out for some of these, you know, these potentials to work together and you know, these team dynamics, if there's some hesitance from some of the, I would say, sovereign agencies, that can actually occur. But one other thing I guess I'd sort of put on that is, you know, even though there's great success stories like the Grand Ronde model watershed, I really can't remember what that acronym, that full acronym is that when you get to these things and you get everybody to the table, when it comes to sovereignty and working together, sometimes there can be uncomfortable situations where, you know, are the people at the table comfortable enough with one another in terms of who gets a say with regards to, okay, are you a sovereign or are you a non-sovereign, and sort of where that puts you. So sometimes that can also really throw a wrench into the gears. So that's something to watch out for as you work towards this, but sort of flipping that over and, you know, the more I work for CritFic and look at some of the policy issues related to natural resource management, we really don't need another data point in the Columbia Basin to sort of tell us what we need to do for fish in a lot of cases. What actually needs to happen is a social change, and that is where one of the biggest strengths can occur. So while sovereigns are going to be careful about, you know, having somebody else come to the table and have a say in terms of what they can do as a sovereign entity, some of the biggest changes that have to occur in the landscape for the good of fish, for wildlife, for native plants and things like that have to come from a bigger social change. And that's probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest places where positive impacts can be made. And that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Thanks, everyone. I did want to kind of feel the room out because part of the panel was to break out into breakout groups by a panelist. I think we have a little bit of time to still do that if people want to try to get a little bit of one-on-one time with people. I know some people had to leave early, but I know for me, it definitely helps sometimes if you want to talk to someone one-on-one. So to facilitate that, if some people are interested in carrying on, I have listed here the panelists with a number in front, and that'll be the breakout group they'll be in. So I'm going to create the breakout groups. In the breakout groups, you can go into them manually. And so I just asked the panelists to go into the breakout groups by the number you're assigned to, and then everybody else can go wherever. So there you go. Don't know if that just did that randomly. I hate breakout groups. Yeah, that's what I wanted. There we go. You might not be in the right rooms, but you can feel free to move to any of them, I believe now.